My name is Shaun Stewart. I'm 46 years of age. Uh, I reside in Virginia Beach, but I grew up in Lexington, Virginia, and I'm the second oldest brother of Anthony Stewart.
So tell me about your brother Anthony and how he was prior to the accident.
So prior to the accident, my brother, he always was in like special ed classes at school, but he was like any other kid, ride bikes, play sports to a certain extent, not like me, but play football, and mostly basketball, but he didn't get a lot of playing time like other kids, but he participated.
So can you talk about his accident and everything you remember about it?
So I say my brother's accident happened around 94. At the time, my brother was probably I say 14. My mother said he was 14 years old because we're just 2 years apart. But I say it was around 94. My brother was like 14 years old. What it was is my father had worked at the Virginia Military Institute, which is called Math in Lexington, Virginia. It's a military school, very prominent school in the United States, but definitely in Virginia. And my father worked there. I remember as a kid, my father had bought my brother a moped one year, like a summer, like a couple of summers prior to him having an accident. My father had bought him a moped, but it was like messed up. It had some issues with it. So, finally got it fixed, but it would break down occasionally. And it was a small body shop that was on the outskirts of Lexington, which was called, I believe at the time it was called Fraser's Repair, small shop, body shop. I'll speak about it a little bit in the biography, or not the biography, but the excuse me, my mind's a little.
Documentary?
The documentary, yeah, I spoke about it in the documentary that I did. We did a little photo shoot out there, a little bit of the filming of the documentary out there. But yeah, I recall them going to get it, and I never get, me and some friends was at Walmart that day, and it was like I would say around like the beginning of June. It was like early summer. And me and some friends rode some bike out to the local Walmart, and we was playing video games out there. And I just remember, a family member coming out there to get us because they at that time Walmart had like an arcade section when they first built it. And I remember a family member coming to get me was like, "Hey, you need to come with us. Your brother had an accident." So we had went to Roanoke, Virginia, because like at the time they took him to Lexington, and I believe it was no services really they didn't have the technology to do like CAT scans and things. So they had, flew him to Roanoke Memorial, which is a hospital about 50 miles south of Lexington off of Interstate 81. And I just remember he was being in a coma for a while as a kid. I really didn't know because I was young myself. Um, him being in a coma for a while, and then him learning how he had to go to Charlottesville, Virginia, they shipped him from Roanoke Memorial to UVA Hospital, and then he had to go through like just therapy and learn how to walk, how to talk, things like that.
So do you remember what life was like after the accident, after he finally was home?
For my mom, it was kind of trying because my mom, basically, my mom really didn't work as a kid. She was sort of a stay-at-home mother. My dad did all the work. My mom had jobs here and there as a kid. But, me and my other siblings, I have a sister and an older brother, and we went to school a lot. But, my mom was basically at home with him, taking care of him, basically nursing him back to like, health as far as like, helping him walk because he still needed to go to like therapy and things like that once he left Charlottesville, because he was in, like I said, he was in the kids rehabilitative center for a period of time while he was in Charlottesville. I would say like almost a year. And then when they brought him back home, he still had like, he was going to like an outpatient rehabilitative class that my mom and dad would take him to. And, basically just, teaching him things, so he can learn how to talk, walk, just small things. Like they did mostly a lot of things I would say like, dealing with like, toys and things, I guess that they taught him to use to bring him back to like, to elevate his consciousness or just so he can be, basically normal again, try to get him back to normal.
So when did life seem to go back to normal at the home after Anthony got back?
I wouldn't never say it went back to normal, but I believe like over time he just learned to live with his condition, from the accident, he learned to live with the condition. And he was basically, he went to school, he was doing whatever other kids would do, but my parents would be more cautious of things he would do. They wouldn't let him hang with me as much because, like I said, we're 2 years apart. Um, uh, I'm 40. I turned 47 this year. He'll be turning 45 in March. I turned 47 in February. So we was always 2 years apart. So we were very close because we hung together as kids. You know, we were just 2 years apart. My sister is a little younger than us, and then my older brother is 6 or 7 years older than both of us. So as he got older, things came a little easier for him as far as adjusting to, the norms of life, as far as like just being able to feed himself, but never really like he had the comprehension of like of adult, like things that we would see and how we would interact with people in places and things. He always had that disability or that handicap when dealing with things outside of the home. If he didn't have certain people around him.
So life was harder for him without people
Yes, sir.
helping him?
Yeah, I would say so. Yes, yes, yes. He was definitely dependent on others to help him with a lot of things.
Right. So did Anthony engage in any type of criminal activity as a juvenile, as far as you know?
No, not really. We was like regular kids when we grew up. We the normal stuff like kids fight. No criminal activities as far as like stealing or nothing like that. But we had as kids, we were ruffians. We just grew up in the country. We were country boys, so we grew up in the country. We had fights with kids in the neighborhood, but never nothing to the point where it was like I may have been a few incidents as kids where we had to go to like a juvenile court, but nothing to that. And I would say this predates even the car, or the accident with him being on the moped or whatever, the issues that, came about after the accident, So no, not really as a juvenile. No, not really.
What about any criminal activity as an adult prior to the 3 cases he's serving time for now?
I would say, yeah, around about 17 or 18. So I would say, yeah, he was a young adult. He would, well, I guess we say, yeah, 17 is a juvenile, but around 17, 18, all of us, me and my older brother and a lot of people was in the streets. It just was that time period. We hustled, we ran the streets. So my brother basically mimicked things that he saw us do. He wasn't doing it at the extent that, my older brother was doing it, or maybe like I was trying to do it. But mostly like, at the age we meddle with like, weed and, marijuana, smoking weed, things that normal kids do in high school, experiment with marijuana or stuff like that, basically basic stuff, but no real serious charges to like, I would say after 18. And I wouldn't even say these serious charges, just like getting into into the culture of the way the world was, the crack epidemic at that time period in the early, late 80s and early 90s, and just the stuff that was going on then at that time period.
So let's talk about the 3 cases he's convicted of in chronological order. Can you talk about each charge, conviction, and sentence?
Yeah, so the first case occurred with my brother, I would say on October. Out of these charges, you talking about the charges that he's facing right now?
Right, right.
Right. Okay. So the first charge happened on October 6th. He had rode with the girl, a friend of his, or who he thought was a friend of his, a girl by the name of Sarah Ruley. I didn't really know of her because I had just got out of doing time myself. And when I came home, this was just somebody that he associated with. I more so I thought it was like a I don't know, like they had a little relationship, but nothing serious. They hung, they got high and was cool. The first incident was with her. Is the court's document. When I went to court, they said that the cops said that they followed my brother Anthony or Tony and Sarah to Roanoke, Virginia. They went to a mall. They was basically surveillance to her, surveillance to her because they had heard something, and they followed them to this mall, which is called Valley View Mall in Roanoke, Virginia. First, they followed them to what they called a drug area, Northwest Roanoke. They followed them to Roanoke to some area. They watched my brother get out, go in the house, come out. He went in the house but a short period of time. Come out, get in the car. Then they followed him from that house over to the Valley View Mall. One of the cops followed them into the mall. One of the undercover cops followed them into the mall. They watched them go into a few stores, purchase some gifts, some things out the mall, and then they left from there, went to a gas station and to like a little fast food place, and then they got back on 81. Now, during this whole process, they never pulled them over, never searched the car, but they were surveillancing them basically, just watching them. So they followed them from Lexington to Roanoke, and then back from Roanoke to Lexington. When they get back to Lexington, they was basically surveillance in the house where my brother was staying, which is with my mother, which her address is in Lexington. They watched the house. I say about for about 30 to 45 minutes, 30 minutes to an hour, and then Sarah left. My brother didn't leave with her. They follow her on the outskirts of Lexington. So when I say outskirts of Lexington, Lexington is not a very big city, but it's very how would I say? It's big in the essence of once you travel so far, it kind of like blends in, and it just goes into the county because it's a small city, a small town. So they followed her to the outskirts of Rockbridge County and pulled her over on this back road, which we would call like the road swings. It's like an area where people can go in the river and swim. Very dark area. They pull over some of these drug task force cops or some of these undercover cops, and they search her car. So when they search her car, she produces to the officers a pipe or some smoking device. I believe a bubble. That's what one of the officers said. A bubble, a small amount of meth, which was about an 8 ball, and then like a very small amount of marijuana, which they didn't really, notify in court. They just said a very small amount of marijuana, and from that, they took her back to the police station or the sheriff's department and started questioning her about, where did she get the drugs? Well, she just tells them verbally, I got the drug from Anthony Stewart. Now, mind you, she tells them this, never was no search warrant produced, and then she took them back to the residence where they had already been surveilling, as I was telling you, and no search warrant or no search was conducted on my mother's house to see if, there was any drugs there, to see if her story was actually accurate. And that was the first case. So on that first case, they gave him, that was the first case. When he went to court, that was part of the whole package of, the whole sentence is a totality. I think they gave him 20 years for that and suspended 10 at that point on that charge.
Okay, so that was the first charge that he got 10 years for. What about the second and third charges?
All right, so the second charge was he was in a car, and this is the first charge was on October 6th of 2020. The second charge was on October 7th of 2020, which was the next day. So same thing. There is a girl by the name of Tabitha Wills who my brother's ex-wife, that's her niece. So she's basically like, my brother's like basically through marriage, it's her uncle. She's the older female, but younger than my brother. She's probably in her early, I say mid-20s. So what she says in the courtroom, this is another, all three are traffic stops. Let me get that correct. So the October 6th one, first traffic stop was with Sarah Ruley. Then the second traffic stop is with Tabitha Wills. So second traffic stop, same thing, similar. So-called, my brother called Tabitha. He said he wanted to ride to Roanoke to get some marijuana, a small amount of marijuana, whatever. She takes him to Roanoke, goes to same thing, police surveillance in them, watch them go to this same drug-infested area, supposedly, but Roanoke is a big city. It's a big city. It's probably the biggest city. It is the biggest city in southwestern Virginia. Roanoke is. So they go to Roanoke. They watch him go in the house. Never pull him over. Same exact incident. Follow them out of Roanoke, and then pull them over right as they get outside of the city limits, right outside of Rockbridge County or outside of Lexington, the city of Lexington. And then what's so unique about that case is during the trial, when he was being cross-examined, I believe my brother's attorney was asking him like, "Hey, was the tags legit or whatever on the car?" What the cop said is they still had even though they were surveilling them, they still had to have some reason to pull them over once they got back in Rockbridge County, because if they would have pulled them over in Roanoke or Roanoke County, because Roanoke City sits inside of Roanoke County. If they would have pulled them over, that would have got cops from that agency involved, which would have messed up basically what they were trying to do. So what they did was they followed him back. Now he says in the court documents, I have the paperwork, I have the transcripts from the trial, and I have audio of him saying at the court proceeding that I ran the tags while I was following them, and the vehicle that she was driving was, I believe, like a 1998 Pontiac Grand Am, older Grand Am. Said when he ran the tags that the tags came back to some type of SUV. I believe he said a Jeep Cherokee or older Jeep, some type of Jeep Wrangler or a Jeep Cherokee. He said he ran the tags several times. and that she was driving excessive speeds back down, Interstate 81 from Roanoke to Lexington. That he ran the text a couple times, and he's like, the text keep coming back. So now he had basically probable cause that when they crossed back over into the county of Rockbridge to pull him over. He says this on audio when he gets back inside of Rockbridge County, and they finally, hit the lights to get them to pull over, and they pull him over on the shoulder of the highway. He runs the tags again. The tags come back to the car. So the tags were legit on the car. So at that time, he really even had no probable cause to search this female's car, Tabitha Wills, who my brother was with, who, as I said, was is basically a family member through marriage because my brother married her aunt, which makes my brother, basically her aunt, basically her uncle. So he pulls him over. I don't know how many cops is there, 10, 11, 12 cops on the side of the highway. This is nighttime. I don't know what time of morning, but I say around between 11:30, 12 o'clock at night. They search the car, find no drugs on my brother, separate both of them, take him to one police officer's car or state trooper, and separate her. And when the cop, one of the other cops in court says, they asked her does she have any drugs or anything on her? She just willingly went in her pants and pulled out what he thought at the time was just marijuana. And she hands it to the officer. When they get back to the police station, I believe, or somewhere on the side of the highway, I don't know the exact, it was either on the side of the highway or at the police station when they got back, that they checked the bag and it was actually an ounce of cocaine stuffed inside of that ounce of marijuana. So at that time, they charged the driver, who the car at the time was registered to her father, but she was driving her father's car. She had a legit license. And they charged my brother for being just in the vehicle.
And she didn't get charged, correct?
She got charged, and then they charged him as well. They charged both people in the car. But what I'm saying is that don't make sense to me because, as I was always told, possession is 9/10 of the law. So if you get pulled over and the drugs is on you and your person in a car that's registered to your father, and your license is registered to the same address that the car is registered to, how do you get charged with those drugs if they're on your person? You pulled them out of your pants. This is in the court documentation that she willingly went in her underwear and handed to the officer that, was on the side of the highway the drugs. And she said that she got the drugs from Anthony Stewart.
So that was the second case. What about the third case?
So the third case is the most unique case out of all of them to me. One of the most unique cases because this is crazy to me. The third case is he's with a friend that we grew up in our neighborhood. His name is Christian Styles, but we've known him as Chris Hobson. I don't know what Christian Styles or Chris Hobson. He goes by either one. What Chris says on the stand in front of the grand jury at the trial proceeding, he says that he was riding through the neighborhood and he saw my brother walking down the street because we live in where Chris lives and my mom lives. It's about a block apart. So he was coming up a block and he saw my brother walking down the street from my mother's house and he said that he stopped. And he told my brother that he was going to Roanoke. Same thing, same identical stuff. As I said, 3 traffic stops. This was on October 13th. So this was basically a week from the first two. Basically, just all of this happened in one calendar week in October of 2020. So on October 13th, he sees my brother walking. He picks him up. Chris says, he tells my brother he's going to Roanoke. He says, my brother asked him, well, let me ride with you. So he's like, sure. So what Chris's words is in the courtroom, he just wanted to tag along for the ride. So they go to Roanoke. And when they get to Roanoke, Chris goes to his aunt's house. And at his aunt's house, his fiance and my brother have a conversation about buying an 8-ball of Coke. This is what he says in the courtroom, that there was a dispute between my brother and his uncle about the price of the amount of Coke that he was trying to get, which my brother was trying to buy an 8-ball from Chris's aunt's fiance. This is what he says on court document. I got it on audio. I got it in the transcripts. He gives the drug to my brother, his uncle does. And, they argue back and forth over the price for a while. And then at that period, they just sit there. So now the whole time the police was surveillancing them. And even one of the cops goes on to say that in the courtroom that they knew that Chris or Christian Styles, we call him Chris, but Chris didn't have a legitimate license. But they have followed him from Rockbridge County, which is a 50-mile distance from Lexington on 81, Interstate 81 to Roanoke. That's about a 50-mile drive. They know the cops heard, and when they ran this thing, found out like, hey, Chris don't have a license. So how do you allow this man to drive? First of all, to drive from one county through several counties to get to Roanoke, and then, for him to take him to his, because he says this on the stand, he took him to his aunt's house where he got the drugs. So that's a form of aiding and abetting. You took my brother to your aunt's house to get the drugs from your aunt's fiance. So the connection of the drugs was you picked my brother up. You said he wanted to tag along, but yeah, you took him to your aunt's house and he got the drugs from your aunt's boyfriend. I thought it was a very strange thing. So then, the cops admit that Chris ain't had a license. This is how I knew that Chris was lying about it. So I remember this day very clearly because at the time I was living in Northern Virginia. I lived outside of, I was staying not too far from DC. I had just came home, but I was staying, weekends with my girlfriend, and I was coming back from spending the weekend with my girlfriend. So I was driving back towards, Lexington, and I had spoke to my brother that day. He had called me on the phone. He's like, I'm in Roanoke, but the whole time I've been here, the police has been following me. So I'm like, following you? What you mean following you? He's like, I don't know. They just following us. So I was like, yo, y'all, what y'all doing up there? He's like, well, I'm with Chris, but we've been getting high all morning, and I have a little bit of coke on me. I said, man, me, just being real. I said, man, get that, throw it away. What did you hold on for? He never throws the drugs away. And this goes to show a level, because if it's me, I'm just going to be real. I'm not going to hold no drugs. He keeps the drugs. So he's riding around. No, when he's being cross-examined by my brother's attorney in the court proceeding, well, my brother's attorney asked Chris, when he told you, you knew of the police following y'all around Roanoke, what did you tell Mr. Stewart, who was in your car, that you said, that you had just took him to get this, 8 ball of cocaine or whatever from your aunt's fiance? He said, I told him to don't throw it down my vehicle or to keep it or something. I couldn't remember exactly what he said, but he said, yeah, I told him that the police was following us. So this was very strange. In the court proceedings, there was an incident while they was riding around and the police was following them. Somebody had called my brother, and one of these females he was cool with or something, like, can you loan me some money? So, or could you take me somewhere my brother asked him to take him somewhere so he could send a MoneyGram asked Chris to take him somewhere to send a MoneyGram to somebody. So I thought that was kind of strange. But Chris said that, he went ahead. Then when the officer got up on stand and my brother's attorney or the Commonwealth attorney had cross-examined him, he said that he had jumped ahead of the caravan. So I had to think about that logically. How, if you're following these people, how would you jump ahead of the caravan or the people that you're following? If you're following them, you don't know where they're going. How would you jump ahead of them unless the person that you're following knows that he's texting you or saying something like, hey, this is where I'm going. Like, he's basically, I'm saying that Chris worked for them. This was a setup. This is what I'm saying. So Chris worked for the police, I believe, because Chris had drug charges. So when Chris came to court to testify, really, Chris didn't have to come. And the connection I have between the traffic stop on October 6th with Tabitha Wills and the traffic stop with Chris on October 13th, which I find very strange, is when Tabitha was pulled over in the vehicle that I told you was owned by her father, and my brother was the passenger, and they found an ounce of coke and the marijuana on her, and she willingly gave them to her off her person. They charged my brother, but they found no drugs on him. But when Chris got pulled over with my brother, they didn't charge him. I thought it was a very strange correlation between the two cases. I thought it didn't match up. So you charged him when he was in the car with Tabitha, but and you did find my brother. My brother did get caught with that 8 ball of coke eventually when they traveled back down 81. Same incident. They wait till they got back in Rockbridge County because they had no jurisdiction outside of Rockbridge. Pulled them back over, right outside of Lexington, which Lexington sits in Rockbridge County. And when they searched the car, they found the 8 ball of coke on my brother. But you didn't charge Chris in that incident. But he was in the van or the vehicle with Chris. I thought it was a very strange incident. I just looked at it from the standpoint that you didn't charge Chris, and then when Chris go to court later, come to find out that Chris had caught several drug indictments. So he really had no case, no reason to testify against my brother. He had nothing to gain from it because this case is, he didn't catch no charges that night that my brother was pulled over in his vehicle. And then he had caught separate charges outside of an incident that was in that same, in the vehicle with my brother. So I just thought that was a very strange, correlation that on that case.
So with these three cases, he was found, I'm sorry, with previous cases, he was found incompetent to stand trial, right?
So for one previous case, he was found back in October 29th of 2020. He was found by Judge Muford W. Trombone, and I got the paperwork. I don't have no audio for this, but I have the actual paperwork. So my brother went to court. It says the defendant was led to the bar in the custody of the sheriff in court and represented by counsel. The court received and considered a letter dated October 21st of 2020 from the Rockbridge Community Service Board, which is like in Rockbridge, that's the mental health clinic, the Rockbridge Community Service Board. The court having previously found pursuant to Virginia Code 19.2-169.3 that the defendant is unrestorably incompetent to stand trial for the foreseeable future based on evidence presented at the March 10th, 2020 hearing to which the counsel for the defendant concurred. The court denies the Commonwealth's request to reopen this issue of the defendant's competency to stand trial and present information of events having occurred since the findings of the incompetency to the evaluator for reconsideration on that issue. The court having heard arguments of cancel orders that the defendant is unrestorably incompetent for the foreseeable future based on evidence presented at March 10th hearing. These charges shall be dismissed pursuant to Virginia Code 19.2-169.3, and that the defendant should be generally released as to the charges currently before the court only. So while my brother was sitting in court, I told you that these three charges had happened in 2020 of October 6th, October 7th, and October 13th. He caught three charges in one calendar week. While he's sitting without a bond for these new charges that he caught on those 3 dates, he had already had these 14 drug charges pending. He goes to court and they found him incompetent and unrestorable and for the foreseeable future. This was on October 29th. So this was basically like around about 16 days later after the last charge, which was brought against him on October 13th. And they dismissed all these charges. So while he's sitting in court on new charges, he goes to court for charges that were already pending and beat him on incompetent and unrestorable and for the foreseeable future by the same doctor who evaluated him, which was Scott Bender, who works for the ILPPP at UVA, the University of Virginia, which the ILPPP stands for the Institute of Law, Public Psychiatry, and the Institute of Law, Psychiatry, and Public Policy.
So was that brought up during his trials? Like he was found incompetent previously?
Yes, sir.
So did they say why he was found competent for these three charges?
What makes him competent, and I'm gonna read it to you real quick. This is why they saying he's competent. Let me get the paper. I got it right here. So Dr. Scott Bender says in his last evaluation that was conducted on December 15th of 2020, Dr. Scott Bender says how he came to the understanding that my brother was competent. He said that, and I'm reading this from the transcript. Let me read it out of the actual evaluation. I got it right here. So he goes on to say right here on page 13 of the evaluation that was conducted, he said, in contrast to his most recent evaluations, which us in 2019 and early 2020, Mr. Stewart presented as much more alert. So he's saying the reason he come to this on this last evaluation, that why he found him competent, it was because he seemed much more alert, motivated, and engaged in the present evaluation. And this is what he goes on to name how he came to that judgment. He says there are several possible reasons for this improvement: a period of abstinence from drug use, a stable diet, stable schedule in housing due to incarceration, inconsistency in treatment adherence from his medical condition, dialysis and medications, and recovery from an exacerbation of his end-stage renal disease in 2018. I thought that was like the most. I thought that was the most for a doctor to say that it was very hypocritical. And the reason I say that because how does a person recover from end-stage renal disease when you're taking dialysis treatments other than death or getting a transplant? You tell me. Because scientifically, if we're talking about the essence of medicine and in the field of medicine, if a person had been living, because my brother was diagnosed with kidney disease in 2008, have documentation to prove it. In 2018, he became end-stage renal disease. It had got to that point where he needed to be, be on the machine. How do somebody recover from that? And what I was saying is, if you take somebody, basic science, common sense, they teach you this. I've been to drug classes. I've did time myself. I've been to drug programs. They tell you that if you take a person who's been getting high consistently over a long period of time, or let's just say over a short period of time, and then you incarcerate them, when a person becomes clean and sober, they're definitely going to be more alert. They're definitely going to be more present in the moment. If you're asking a question, they're going to definitely be more motivated because now they have had a chance to detox. So if you take them out of the environment, which is the streets or society, and you put them in a jail where they get clean, and then you give them on a stable diet, which I wouldn't call jail food a stable diet. I've never heard of that before in my life. But then this same individual that you took off the streets, he's not getting high no more. He is going to dialysis treatments, and he's no longer on these substances like cocaine or marijuana that make you act other than yourself. Then he would definitely be more alert. But how do you? I've never heard of anything because I know that you cannot reverse or you fix damaged brain tissue. So how can you fix somebody who their whole life has been living with a low IQ, who's been in special educational classes, and then on top of this man had a traumatic brain injury, neurocognitive damage from the traumatic brain injury, and then you put on top of that he's living with end-stage renal disease, which further damages cognitive repair, and then on top of that you put a drug habit. You factor all of these elements into a normal person who ain't on end-stage renal disease. It could be me or you or anybody else. How do you think that would affect the person? And then when you take them out of society and put them in a jail cell where they can get clean and you can have a conversation with them, they definitely would be more alert. It's basic science. Like, it don't even take a rocket scientist to make note of that. So this is why the same reason what he put in here was the same reason why he reversed his less than 60 days now. Let me correct that. Less than 8 months. Less than 8 months, he came back with this analysis and this evaluation after he had just found him incompetent, unrestorable, and for the foreseeable future. And then basically between an 8-month period, because we got to go back to like March of that calendar. But if we come all the way up to October when he went to court on, which was the October 29th, he says in the courtroom that he's incompetent, unrestorable, and for the foreseeable future. So what does those words mean in the context of saying that a person is unrestorable, incompetent, and for the foreseeable future? And then for a judge to act on that, the judge must be putting something in place to protect him because he knows that this man is going to come back because he has a pattern of doing things when it comes to, this type of behavior.
So did your brother's defense not hone in on the fact that he was found incompetent previously?
Yes, sir. So three different times they filed 3 different motions in the court. And I have the sound bites. Once again, like I said, I have the audio for that. 3 times did my brother's former attorney, Mr. Melvin Hill, who also spoke on one of the podcasts previously to me and you having this podcast today. He spoke on one of the podcasts called, I was on a podcast called SPINCYCLE 733. And I had like a panel of different people up there speaking. Mr. Melvin Hill spoke, and 3 times did he preserve his rights because he knew that the court case was going to be, they was basically being kind of like I don't want to say prejudiced, but they were being very biased for the Commonwealth versus my brother. He filed 3 different motions on. He wanted these charges to be dismissed because the courts never proved that he was competent to stand trial. And then what his main argument was is, and I actually had the soundbite as well again. I would say it was around like February 14th. It was a motion filed to the circuit court before my brother had his jury trial with Judge Christopher Russell, who was the sitting judge over these cases that my brother went in front of. Even though he took the jury trial, Judge Chris Russell was the judge that presided over these charges. Judge, when my brother's former attorney, Mr. Melvin Hill, presented this to the courts, these 3 motions on these charges should be dismissed, he also presented to the courts that how do a person go from being incompetent, unrestorable, and for the foreseeable future to competent when no service is rendered in between? Because there was never no service again. And then at the sentencing phase, which was on August 9th of 2022, when he finally went to trial 2 years, after the last evaluation, or, maybe about 18 months, give or take, right in that ballpark of 2 years, when he was cross-examined on the stand, he asked him, what services were rendered between your evaluations, your first and second, or your second and third evaluations? The Dr. Scott Bender said none as I know of. So how does somebody go from being incompetent, unrestorable, for the foreseeable future to competent, but no service is rendered? And the only place that he was sent was to the Rockbridge Community Service Board. And I'm gonna read to you what they said. This is when he beat the 14 charges. This is what the Rockbridge Area Community Service Board says about my brother. This is why he was sitting in jail with new charges, but also charges that was pending, that he beat the 14 prior to going to court for these last 3 and getting sentenced to 40 years, and I'm suspending all of it, but 21 years and 6 months of that sentence. They go on to say, and this letter is dated October 21st. So this was about 8 days after my brother was incarcerated on October 13th for the most recent charges that he's doing this serious amount of time for now. The letter is wrote by, I'm trying to see by Erica Oren. She goes on to say, Dear Judge Trombone, I am writing to you regarding the case of the Commonwealth of Virginia versus Anthony Stewart. During Mr. Stewart's last court hearing, you requested further information regarding services for Mr. Stewart that may be available through our agency, the Rockbridge Area Community Service Board, which I told you was the mental health clinic in Lexington, Virginia. He goes on to say, our services and agencies where he could be referred for services. As I requested, I presented this case to the Rockbridge Area Services clinical team, which is comprised of several licensed therapists, our clinical director and our medical director. The clinical team decided that at this time, the Rockbridge Area Community Service Board does not offer any other services that would benefit Mr. Stewart. This decision was based on his current medical issues, which includes dialysis 3 times per week, as well as the history of non-compliance with service, which I never heard to this letter. The team did suggest that a referral be made for mental health skill building, as was suggested in court. And Sarah Harrison has made the referral through Strategic Therapy Associates. In speaking with staff with Strategic Therapy Associates, the intake for this service never occurred as Mr. Stewart was reincarcerated. If there's any questions you would like to discuss this further or on this further, please don't hesitate to contact me at. And then he says, thank you for your time and consideration on this matter. So at that time, my brother was registered to go to meet with, which is about 30 minutes from Lexington in Fishersville, Virginia, the Woodrow Wilson Rehabilitative Center. He never made it there because he got reincarcerated on the 13th. And then he sit from October 13th in jail all the way to, I say about, this is of 2020. He's sitting there all the way to October of 11th or 12th of 2021. So he's sitting in jail 1 day shy of a year before they gave him house arrest. And then he sit on house arrest for a little bit over a year till he went to court in February of on February 24th and 25th of 2022. He was on house arrest.
So it took them a year to convict him on all 3 cases?
It took them a year to convict him on all 3 cases. And there were several times that they stopped the case because of issues, even with, because the Commonwealth attorney had subpoenaed, I would say 17 cops to talk, or total, I say about 14 cops with three people to talk. The 3 people that was involved in these incidents: Sarah Ruley, Tabitha Wills, and Kristen Stiles, or Kristen Hopkins. She had subpoenaed 14 officers to speak, and I believe one of the cases, two, 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 two of the continuances was on her part. The former Commonwealth attorney, Mary Lester, who retired right after she got my brother these charges. Once she convicted my brother, who she said was the big fish, which I thought it was the craziest thing ever, from a person that was incompetent and living with end-stage renal disease. She had subpoenaed all of these cops, and her witnesses to court. And I think it was 2 times that she had the case, you know, uh, put off because she needed, one of the cops couldn't be there or something.
So was Anthony offered any type of plea deals while he was on trial for any of the 3 cases?
So they offered him 10 years. That's the only thing I heard of. They offered him 10 years. But my case with my family is, how can you, and I'm gonna get into something else, prior to this, from an older evaluation, but how can you offer a man a plea bargain who has a history of mental illness, who was involved in a traumatic, who was involved in a serious accident which led to a traumatic brain injury? How do you place somebody in prison for 10 years like that without looking at the totality of the history, which is over 21 years, because it's well documented? The accident in 94, and my brother probably was getting in trouble since, off and on for minor drug charges or run-ins with the law for minor things, mostly drug charges, as I said before, since I say 98 or 99. And it's a pure history of, because there was mad evaluations conducted over this time. It just really wasn't until like 2008 that they actually started getting actual documentation showing, hey man, this man, it's some issues really going on with him. Because it's one thing to have a knowledge of it, but until you educate yourself on the level of understanding, what a traumatic brain injury is, what mental health is, what defines a person with neurocognitive defects. And then when you factor in other things like low IQ, a person that's been in special ed classes their whole life, like my brother, and then basically he didn't even graduate from school. He was basically passed through school on an IEP diploma because, just through attendance. You know what I'm saying? All of these things have to factor in. We have all this documentation, and even the courts have this same documentation. And my thing is, how do you overlook these issues and offer a man 10 years? But prior to any of this, I have proof of a case that happened with my brother in 2008. And the psychiatrist that evaluated him was a doctor by the name of Thomas Ryan. He's a very well-known doctor on the East Coast. He does a lot of independent things. He's dealt with, high-profile cases. My brother in 2008 was sent to Western State, which is the mental hospital in Shenandoah Valley, which is a Stanton, Virginia, Harrisonburg, around the JMU area, James Madison University area. And this doctor, first they had my brother evaluated by 2 people. I don't know the doctor's names. I have to look through a lot of documentation, but there was 2 doctors that had evaluated my brother. And I believe it's in this documentation. But what it was is, they evaluated him on a one-day basis, just for a few hours. They took him in, this is in 2008. He was found competent to stand trial at this period. Okay, then I believe his lawyer or whoever at that time asked for a second opinion. They had Dr. Thomas Ryan evaluate him. Dr. Thomas Ryan goes on to say, man, this man's incompetent. Courts noted that this doctor is saying he's incompetent, but the judge that was in power at the time, Michael Irvin, and the Commonwealth attorney that was in power at the time, his name was Bucky Joyce. Both of them are retired now, but they knew of this and still sent my brother to prison for 8 years in 2008, knowing that he was incompetent. So instead of sending them somewhere to get services, I'm going to read you what the doctor said in 2008. So this is how long this madness has been going on with my brother's case. So this is just his words in his evaluation. And he wrote recently when I asked, so this is a strange thing. Recently, my brother's attorney, I say around, we in January now, so I would say around late October or early November, my brother's attorney went to the Rockbridge Circuit Courthouse in Lexington. He went to the clerk of court and asked for documentation of my brother's evaluation from 2008. The court told them at the time period, which was very strange. They said, "Oh, we don't have that paperwork. We destroyed it. We destroyed the paperwork." I thought it was very odd. So when I called the doctor, I finally got in touch with this doctor over, I didn't even know Dr. Thomas Ryan until, I heard of him just because I have so many evaluations. Every time they do an evaluation, they piss like the doctor that recently evaluated my brother will put the history of other doctors and their evaluations in the body of the documentation. So when I looked him up, I finally got his number, and through Dr. Thomas Showalter, who has been helping me, Dr. Kenneth Showalter, who has been helping me, another psychiatrist, he gave me the number to Dr. Thomas Ryan. So I contacted the office. I contacted him about 4 or 5 times. I never got a response. Finally, one day out the blue, he calls me back from a private number. Luckily, I answer it. It's him on the phone. We have a very brief conversation. I think we talked for about 10 minutes. I asked him for the paperwork. He was generous enough to send me the paperwork. We had a good conversation. And when I told him what had happened, recently with my brother, because he hadn't seen him since 2008. I want you to keep this in mind. He said, "What?" He's like, so he never knew even back in 2008 that after he found my brother incompetent, that he still was sent to prison. He didn't even know that at that time period, he was given an 8-year sentence. And, in Virginia, you do 85% of it. So he was locked up from 2008 to 2014. And immediately after he got released from incarceration in 2014, he went straight back to getting high and doing whatever he do with drugs. He never missed a beat. So as soon as he gets out, he goes straight back to the same behavior, which just had got him an 8-year sentence prior to him, coming home. So let me read to you what he says. And he speaks about the other doctors that does this evaluation. So he goes on to say this. It's a little hard to read, but I've read it so much now I can kind of look through it. He said, and this is in the conclusions. I have a copy of this. He goes on to say, this remains obsolete. In the diagnostic formulation originally outlined in the psychological evaluation performed on March 15th of 2007, again, I respectfully disagree with Dr. Kruper and Ms. Linsby. He goes on to say, and that Mr. Stewart does not meet the criteria for major mental illness. It is striking that moderate brain damage affecting virtually all aspects of Mr. Stewart's information processing would be considered a major mental illness. That's what he's saying. He's basically saying the 2 doctors that says he don't have a major mental illness, he's evaluated him as saying he does have a major mental illness. So he goes on to say, although speculative, their reasoning may be that he does not exhibit symptomology consistent with active psychotic disorder. Additionally, those individuals met with Mr. Stewart for an undetermined period of time on one day. Particularly, this evaluator was fortunate to evaluate Mr. Stewart on 3 occasions, an access span of 12 months. So what he's saying is the 2 doctors that saw him, they had the opportunity to talk with him on one day. The Dr. Thomas Ryan saying, I saw the same man 3 times over the span of 12 months. And this is what he comes to in his conclusion, because the conclusion, we can read the body, but the conclusion is always where they come to their determination if a person is competent to stand trial or incompetent, So he goes on to the conclusion, says, considering Mr. Stewart's moderate neuropsychological impairment reflected compromised brain functioning, he will require serious consideration of special placement as well as provision of certain services. Individuals such as this, due to their impaired cognitive processing abilities, are frequently taken advantage of in negative fashion, physically, mentally, and sexually when incarcerated. Information will necessarily need to be presented to Mr. Stewart in a simplistic and concrete and repetitive fashion in order to ensure adequate comprehension as well as retention of novel information. Cognitive uh, rudimentation clearly will be indicated in Mr. Stewart's case, given the pervasive nature of his neuropsychological compromise. Teaching Mr. Stewart some very basic vocational skills will be helpful regarding his correctional rehabilitation, providing him with self-esteem and job skills necessary when he is eventually released should he serve prison time. So he's telling these two judges at this time, he's telling this one judge at this time period in the Commonwealth attorney when he had his second evaluation, when they wanted when I believe his attorney at the time was David Stow, I believe somebody asked the courts, hey, have him evaluated again after the first two doctors, who was Dr. Kruper and Miss Linsby, evaluated him. They was like, hey, let's have him evaluated again and get another, let's get somebody else's analysis on him. When they did it, he came back and said, hey, man, this man's incompetent. But yet they still sent him to prison. So then when we fast forward from 2008 to 2015, he goes in front of Dr. Kenneth Showalter. So Dr. Kenneth Showalter is the second doctor in 2000 in March of 2015, who says this man's incompetent and that there's nothing in the current state of medicine that can ever restore him to competence.
And there and there was multiple doctors that had like conflicting reports, right? That he was competent and that he was incompetent to stand trial.
Right. So I have me and my girlfriend had did, a breakdown of all the evaluations from what we could see, because I believe there's more. It's actually more than this, but just we only could go off of the documentation that we had access to, that we've been like accumulating over a period of time. But my brother had 19 evaluations over a period of 21 years, 13 incompetence and 6 competent, with 2 of those 13 being incompetent and unrestorable, once in 2017 and again in 2020. So two different doctors had evaluated my brother, and since 2015 to present, 2 doctors have found him incompetent and unrestorable. But never after he was found incompetent and unrestorable did the courts intervene and send him somewhere to get, the proper services, or, let's house him in a mental institute till we could get the proper help. So when he go back out in society, he can be productive. That's what the doctor was saying in 2008. He needs to be sent somewhere where he could get, vocational skills. We can learn to live on his own maybe one day, because, nobody's promised to live forever, especially my mother. She's 80 years old. So, my mom has been his main caretaker. And I want you to get an understanding of this. My brother's been on disability since he's been, 15 to 16 years old. So we live in America. What does that mean to you? If a person's been living on disability and he's been living on disability since 15 or 14, since the age of 15 to 16, whenever he was, actually, able to get it, to current, which he's about to turn 45 in March, like I told you. What does that mean? If he's disabled, he's living on disability, so he's never had a job in his life outside of maybe 1 or 2. And that was just because and he couldn't even work the full amount of 40-hour weeks like a normal human being. It's just he wanted a job to be around girls, or just to say he's doing something.
So how's your brother doing these days in prison?
So as far as his numbers, with his kidneys, they've been consistent. They've been pretty good. They've been stable for the most part, but he's had incidents while he's been incarcerated. Actually sent the links out. He's been in the Richmond Times Dispatch, which is the biggest paper in the state of Virginia. And Richmond is the capital of the state of Virginia. He's been in those papers several times due to the treatment that not only he's receiving at Greensville Correctional Center, where he's currently incarcerated, but other inmates. He's been there. He's had issues with the catheter. There's been incidents where There was a riot in the prison at one time due to some. It's been a lot of overdoses there. It's been bad publicity and bad things going on at the Greensville Correctional Center in Virginia. That's where he's housed at, because there's only like, maybe 2 prisons in the state of Virginia, or maybe 3, that actually administers dialysis treatments. So they actually have a medical facility on the compound where he could go get his dialysis treatments, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday of each week. So recently he had an issue where the catheter was loose. I would say around like early July, no, not early July, late July, and the first couple of weeks of August, they were locked down for about 3 to 4 weeks, maybe a little longer than that. They was locked down almost a month, I would say, to be accurate. Locked down almost a month, and he had issues with the catheter because he had a port in him, but something happened with the port, and then they was supposed to, just give him this catheter for temporary use until they fixed the port. Well, they never fixed the port, which they still haven't fixed the port. They took them to get it fixed, but they still haven't used the port. He's still using the catheter, and the catheter head came loose. So my brother don't really, as I said, he's not mentally sound. So when he goes, he can't even basically articulate his conversation medically to the nurses at the facility to be like, hey, man, this port is not right. So when he goes to see the nurse is like, hey, don't touch that. It's loose. Don't let nothing get in and no dirt or water. It could kill you. So my thing is like, wow, if you telling a man that's incompetent is, and he can't defend himself, so then when they finally take him to VCU Medical or MCV Medical, which is the college there, but it's a medical unit where they take all of the prisoners, for medical treatment. They took him to the hospital. The lady told my brother when they had brought him there, "You lucky to be alive because his potassium levels were so high that his potassium levels were so high, and that the catheter was so loose. He's like, you're lucky to be alive because he wasn't being dialyzed properly while he was on the machine because it wasn't a strong connection, I believe. As I said, I'm not a medical doctor, just going off what he's trying to, relay, and then I go Google certain things to try to get a better understanding of what he's saying to me medically to keep up with what's going on with him. And then recently, the issue was we told him to file a grievance, and he wrote a grievance to the warden. I have a copy of it. I'm gonna make sure I email it over to you. In the email, he filed a grievance. He had an inmate help him that's in his pod send a grievance to the warden about his medical treatment and how the medical staff was treating him at Greensville Correctional Center. So when he did, the warden sent him, when he responded, he said that my brother basically faked all of this to go to MCV to just eat real food at the hospital. I thought that was crazy. I thought that was mind-blowing to even say that to somebody.
Yeah, that's really strange. But I mean, then again, wardens aren't really there to be friends with the inmates, so
right.
But that's ridiculous.
Yeah. So as I said, as I got all the documentation, and I'm waiting on the doctor. I don't pick the paperwork up, but this is what was recently wrote by a doctor, and he was basically Dr. Kenneth Showalter. I said he spoke on the 7033 podcast, and somehow I'm gonna get the links to you so you can share it, on your platform so other people can start looking up some of this stuff. Start looking up some of this stuff that I've been doing over for the last couple of years, advocating for my brother. But when Dr. Kenneth Showalter came on the 7033 SPINCYCLE podcast and talked with me, he did this was one of the doctors I told you he was in March of 2015. He found my brother incompetent to stand trial, and they dismissed charges. So he goes to say, I believe I sent you this letter, but I'm gonna just read a little bit of it real quick. It says, given the plethora, and this is dated November 20th, 2023. He wrote this letter on November 20th, 2023. What he did was took all the evaluations that were done by Dr. Scott Bender and then just, analyzed them and then went over them and then sent me a letter on what he thought, his feelings. This is just his feelings on, this is another psychiatrist speaking on the most recent doctor who got my brother convicted. He says, given the plethora of data obtained over the past years regarding Mr. Stewart's level of cognitive functioning and to what degree it impacts his competency to stand trial, and the different opinions regarding his competency and the reason underlying those opinions, it would take a significant amount of time to synthesize all of this information to provide a thorough analysis and summation of this case. I am unable to do justice to this task, but will offer some observations at this point. It is unarguable that Mr. Stewart suffers cognitive defects from both innate and environmental causes. He was born with a brain that he was born with a brain that without any additional post-birth insult would have resulted in well below average functioning once he reached end of the developmental stage of life, somewhere between 18 and 22 on average. However, per Dr. Bender's report, Mr. Stewart suffered concussions at age 4 and 14, both of which involve loss of consciousness. See research by Dr. Jeffrey Barth regarding the effects of concussion on cognitive functioning from the 1980s, which prior to this time, it was mostly thought there were no long-term cognitive sequelae to concussion. Then at age 16, Mr. Stewart suffered a significant head trauma with pronounced consequences with regard to his cognitive functioning. More recently, several years ago, he was diagnosed with end-stage renal disease, and research in this area documents risk and presence of cognitive decline in an individual with chronic kidney disease. It is noted that the kind of cognitive decline in Mr. Stewart associated with biological and medical history is irreversible. This is the doctor's words, and it goes on longer than this. I wouldn't read it because it's 3 pages of of him doing an analysis on Dr. Scott Bender, and he just goes to say he's showing where Dr. Scott Bender contradicts himself so many times, because he goes on to say, as Dr. Bender noted in his 12, 15, 20 evaluation, which was the last evaluation, which led to my brother getting this amount of time. He says, in short, this is what Dr. Bender says. In short, this is a complex case. There has been considerable variability in test findings and opinions over time, and answering the question of his competency to stand trial has been challenging. With all the different evaluators who have assessed Mr. Stewart, it is obvious they will arrive at an opinion based on their questions of Mr. Stewart, and we'll get into specific, very detailed aspects of the case to arrive at their opinion. I would note that from a very much broader view, that may bring a bit of different perspective, but would not be a consideration for the trier of fact that over the years, Mr. Stewart has been opinion competent to stand trial on 6 occasions and incompetent to stand trial on 8 occasions. That's what he says. From my point of view, I would say that the only 5 of the competent findings should count, as the findings Dr. Bell, and this evaluation dated 10/8/19, was conducted in a manner that was not accepted practice for determining competency. Now, what he's saying is this doctor was a doctor that had saw my brother 3 times. I would say like over a year period. His name was Dr. Michael Bell. First 2 or 3 evaluations, he said, hey, man, this man's incompetent. And then he went on to say, even in one of the evaluations, something similar to what Dr. Thomas Ryan says. Due to the current state of medicine, he will never be competent. And from the day of his accident at the age of 16, but which was really 14, from that day, and the traumatic brain injury or the injury that he sustained at that time period, that he could never be that you can never reverse the effects of the damaged brain tissue or just the injury as a whole, that he would be like that for his whole life. And then he went on, and that's why he's saying that. Then he went on to say, in his 3rd evaluation, I just didn't think he was as bad as I thought he was. Like, how do you go from saying that this man is incompetent and that, there's nothing in the medical realm of science due to neurocognitive defects or neurocognitive science, that this man can never be restored to competency due to the injury that he sustained at the age of 16. But then you come back on your last evaluation and say, oh, I didn't think he was as bad as he was, and he's competent to stand trial. They threw these charges out of court. This was prior to even the 14 charges. So it's mind-blowing that these people that look at the case, but then when the doctor gets up in the courtroom, and I have the documentation, the audio as well, the Commonwealth attorney cross-examined him and says, would you say, Mr. Stewart, he can't change his clothes? He said, what you're getting wrong is, I'm not saying that he can't change his clothes, but you may have to tell Mr. Stewart to put on clean clothes. This is what Dr. Bender says. Then he goes on to say is, Once again, in the documentation, as I told you, when he crossed exam, he said, what services were rendered? None as I know of. So him being a doctor and an expert in that field of medicine, how do you allow the courts to try a person that you said you evaluated, but there was no services rendered for you to restore from incompetent, unrestorable, and for the foreseeable future to competent? That's mind blowing. And then you give the same man 21 years, 6 months in prison, which is a death sentence because in the Department of Corrections, I don't know about, Washington State, but in the state of Virginia, it's hard as hell to get a kidney transplant while you're incarcerated. Only a very few people get, transplants while they're incarcerated. But my brother has already been on the machine since 2018. He's been living with, kidney disease since 2008. And then you give him a 21-year sentence. And with the amount of time he has left, which is about 12 years, man, I just don't see good things happening for him if we don't get him out of prison. It could be life or death. That's why we're pressing the issue so hard on so many levels. And, I thank you for just inviting me on here because any place I can be heard and anywhere I can share the information that I have, which is a mountain of evidence to prove that the courts erred in their judgment, I got to do that.
Right, right. Yeah, and the medical treatment in prison, anywhere, federal, state, jail is not good.
Yes, sir.
So how is Tony treated by other inmates and staff in prison?
That's like, I don't know, because he's being housed with, he's in a housing unit where other inmates are like him. They have chronic illnesses. There's a few people in there that ain't, but for the most part, I've never heard, they haven't told me, you gonna always have issues with people in prison just because the frustration that, when you're incarcerated with people, everybody's going through something. You never know what news or, what mood a person can wake up. And then when you're housed in a cell block with, 25 to 30 men, that's a lot of personalities to navigate through each and every day. So, for the most part, he's had a few arguments, disagreements. You're going to have those when you house with disgruntled people or people that's incarcerated suffering, especially in a pod where people are dealing with medical conditions like my brother. But, he hasn't had no fights, which has been a blessing. He hasn't had no fights, he had disagreements, but never to the point where, and as far as staff, he gets the same treatment from, they're not treated no different from people in population. We have good officers and bad officers. You got officers that treat you like a human, and you got officers that treat you like you're not a human. So, he don't get no special treatment in that area. He's treated accordingly by the people who, process their situation, and it's based on how they look at the situation as far as, individually, like from the human being aspect, like, he's a human being, I'm gonna treat him this way, or he's a criminal, or I'm gonna treat him this way, So it's not, I can't really speak on that because I've been blessed to not hear no news from him saying like, he's being extorted or, nobody's bothering him like that. Most people, to be truthful, for the most part, most people that's been in his environment has been kind of helpful because they know what he's dealing with. And then a lot of the officers, because of what I've been doing as far as advocating for him, they've seen some of the podcasts, that's available on YouTube, and like the news thing that his lawyer has done with, WFLS and Duke Carter. So they've looked at the case, and a few officers even said to him, like, it's a bunch of BS what you're going through, and I hope and pray that your brother gets you out of the situation. Hopefully some justice is served and they get you free. So it's a mixed bag.
So is there anything that you would like the public to know about your brother or any of his cases for that matter?
So what we're working on right now is I haven't got it out yet, and once I get it, I'll make sure I share with you. We're working on putting together a petition because we want to file a petition to the governor, which is Mr. Youngkin, and get immediate release of my brother from his from his incarceration, because we know that the incarceration is unjust and uncalled for, and that just not from the medical side, but just the case as a whole, it was a lot of fraudulent stuff done in his case. The whole case to me is, and not just to me, just from the proof of evidence that I have compiled over a 2-year period, we could prove it was nothing short of an entrapment, because they knew of his mental state. Because somebody in their right mind, they couldn't have did that to. The way they did it and the way how they did it, they couldn't have did it to somebody that wasn't incompetent. Yeah, I ain't saying that you couldn't have caught them doing some illegal activity, but my brother was entrapped, and you basically punished him for stuff that was, outside of his last charge. You punished him for things that was caught in the possession of other people, or in the one case, like I told you with Sarah, he wasn't even in the car. So how do you charge him? That's like me and you riding in Seattle, and I'm picking you up, and the police surveilling me, and they pull me over 5 hours after I drop you off wherever you may be at in the state of Washington, and then I get pulled over. Now, well, I got the drugs from Mr. Dodge. Man, how the hell you gonna let that fly? And then you go to court, and the jury convict you of that. And then what my thing is, I don't like to use a race card, but I have to be real. In Rockbridge County, there is black people. So how do you pick a jury of all people, and there's only one black person on the jury? Out of all the people that you pick a jury in Rockbridge County, because a lot of people don't know the history of Rockbridge County. I always try to bring that to mind. Rockbridge County is where Robert E. Lee is buried. And that's where Stonewall Jackson's horse is stuffed at Villamile, at the Military Institute. So the history of it's a chapel there. It's already racial tension in that town or city because people want to change names of, Washington Lee University. They want to change the name of the Lee Chapel. So it goes a little deeper than just the essence of my brother. But Rockbridge does have, you know, some very tainted history when it comes to, racial discrepancy in the courtroom.
So before we conclude this interview, is there anything that you'd like to end with or talk about that we haven't covered yet?
Yeah, so he does right now. Outside the petition, we're working on me and a friend of mine, L'Oreal Pisha. Uh, we're working on getting that done with hopefully with the help of Jolly Good Ginger. I don't know if you ever heard of him. He's an advocate. He has a big presence. I don't know his real name, but he goes by Jolly Good Ginger on Instagram. That's his platform. I don't know his website and all that, but he's we've been reaching out to him. He said he would help us put together this petition that we can use. His case has been he lost his case in the three-judge panel, which is the Court of Appeals, but his lawyer has appealed it to the Supreme Court of Virginia. So we're hoping that in the Supreme Court of Virginia, it gets more recognition. Now it's going in front of a bigger court. Hopefully, the judges in the Supreme Court will look at it more closely than the three-judge panel because they basically just looked over it, threw it to the side, and went with what the doctor said, which was what I told you. The eating properly and all of that. Because in the realm of medical science, giving somebody jail food will not make them competent to stand trial. You know, that's one of them. We're working. My cousin is trying to get a production team to put together another documentary, which is a little bit more detailed because we've been doing it so long, and I've accumulated, over a 2-year period, I've accumulated so much more information and so much more legal paperwork and stuff doing to his medical stuff. We're trying to put together, another documentary, and then we're going to do a GoFundMe to help with the legal fees, and hopefully, if we need anything, just for his comfort while he's incarcerated because of the environment with the food and the things that goes on like that. So, I definitely get all of that information over to you, and hopefully you can share it on some of your social media platforms, things like that. I can give you my email for anybody that would like to reach out. My email is Shaun Stewart, all lowercase letters SHAUN STEWART 1939 at gmail.com. My Facebook is Shaun Stewart. And then my Instagram platform is Easy Will 420 Apparel. I have a clothing line myself, a 420 clothing line. So I've been selling clothes for like 2 or 3 years. I've been in business for like 2 or 3 years. So that's just like my platforms where you can reach out. And my phone number that you can reach me at as well is 757-667-0742. That's my personal number for anybody who would like to reach out or send me a text message on how they can get involved with us advocating to get them out of the situation.
All right. Well, I think we can wrap it there. That was good. Thank you for giving me your time
Yes, sir.
today, and I appreciate you advocating for your brother. I'm sure
Yes,
it's
sir.
not easy, but I'm sure he appreciates it a lot.
Yes, sir.